The city woke early, and so did he. He moved through its streets like someone who'd lived both above and beneath them, who had memorized their rhythm long before life ever gave him a reason to walk tall. The train ride into the city was uneventful. Quiet. Head down. No laptop. No coffee. Just thoughts. A man dressed in function, not flair. He got off at the same stop he'd once used as a teenager, back when he delivered packages for a courier firm that serviced the same district he now returned to, not as a boy, but as a force. The skyscraper stood ahead like a polished monument to ambition. 42 floors of steel, marble, and carefully curated exclusivity. The logo above the door glinted in the morning light, a name that once held power over him, now bearing weight because of him. He reached the front steps just as the crowd thickened. Suits everywhere. Heels, clicks, laughs rehearsed over too many elevators. Badges flashed at turnstiles like golden keys. He stood still. No badge. No tie. No proof. He wasn't late. But he wasn't in. The security guard, mid-conversation, didn't look up before speaking, just barked through routine muscle memory. No entry without a badge. The line behind him shifted. Heads turned. Smirks appeared. They saw him and saw nothing important. Not a vendor. Not a partner. Certainly not the man whose signature had finalized their budget approvals 2 nights prior. He simply nodded once. Stepped aside. Waited. He used the moment to watch. Not the building. The people. How they moved. Who they noticed. Who they ignored. His eyes scanned the interior like a general assessing terrain. Same lighting. Same lobby he had visited once before as a temp. He remembered the feeling of being small here. The feeling of not fitting in. The invisible push against his presence. That feeling hadn't left. But now? He didn't need to push back. He was the pivot. Upstairs, assistants scrambled. The meeting was minutes away. The department heads were gathering. Questions buzzed. Where was he? Phones buzzed. And then someone remembered. He had said he wouldn't be using a driver. Wouldn't be arriving through the executive garage. Wouldn't be entering through a red carpet. He was coming in like everyone else. Because he wasn't interested in theater. He was interested in truth. Down in the lobby, a young employee emerged from the elevator, out of breath, clutching a device. She scanned the entrance once, then again, until her eyes widened. She ran. Straight toward him. There you are. Her voice wasn't panic. It was relief. And when she addressed him formally, clearly, heads turned again. The smirks faded. The security guard paled. Because realization cuts sharper than doubt. And in one breath, the man without a badge became the one whose decisions defined theirs. He nodded, stepped past the turnstile, and entered the building without resistance. Not because he flashed a badge, but because he no longer needed to. This wasn't entry. This was return. He walked through the lobby slowly. Not to delay, but to absorb. Every tile, every potted plant, every poster on the wall had once stood above him. Years ago, they had seemed untouchable. Now they were furniture. He entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 41st floor. It was the same floor he'd once mopped as a part-time cleaner during night shifts, sneaking glances into boardrooms through glass walls, wondering what kind of power made people speak with that kind of certainty. Now, the doors opened for him. The hallway was quiet. Clean. Crisp. The conference room was already full. Chairs occupied by department heads who hadn't yet met him, only read his profile, most of them picturing someone else entirely. They rose when he entered. He didn't ask them to. Their expressions shifted as he stepped in without flourish. No entourage. No speechwriter. No suit that screamed status. Just presence. Controlled. Deliberate. Commanding. He didn't sit at first. He walked to the window. Looked out at the skyline. Let the silence settle. Then turned, faced the room, and began. He didn't speak about his journey. He spoke about theirs. About the numbers. The culture. The blind spots. He called things what they were. Named the rot without softening the words. Laid out plans that weren't dreams, but deadlines. By the time he finished, no one questioned his role. Because authority doesn't require volume. Just vision. After the meeting, a few executives lingered behind. They had questions not about strategy, but about him. Where did he come from? Why had the board chosen him? Was it politics? Optics? He answered none of it. He just handed them the projected quarter map and walked out. They didn't follow. He visited each floor that day. Every department. No warning. No time for them to prepare speeches. He walked past offices where no one looked up until they did. He stood beside interns and engineers, cafeteria workers, and data analysts. Asked how they worked. What they needed. What had never been said aloud. And they answered, nervous at first. then louder, because they had never been asked by someone who looked at them with equal eyes. By dusk, he returned to the ground floor. The security guard was still there, stiff, embarrassed, mumbling an apology. He didn't interrupt. He didn't demand a correction. He simply said, "I understand," and walked past. Because his purpose wasn't revenge. It was reminder. That hierarchy built on badges will always forget how power actually moves. Quietly. From below. The company had gotten used to a certain kind of leadership. Predictable. Scripted. Boardroom voices that rose when stakes were low and vanished when pressure was high. They were used to glossy memos, jargon-laced meetings, decisions made in rooms where none of the consequences ever landed. He broke all of that. Not loudly but methodically. He stopped sending summary decks. Started walking the floors. He didn't ask for quarterly updates through email. He asked the interns themselves in person what systems felt broken and which ones were just outdated habits. He stood in the warehouse during an inventory system test and asked the logistics lead to walk him through every failure. He didn't want rehearsed solutions. He wanted friction. Because friction was where truth lived. The higher-ups were unsettled. Not because he was unqualified, but because he was uncontrolled. He didn't play the part. Didn't court the press. Didn't host lavish retreats. Didn't name buildings after himself. Instead, he dismantled the org chart, flattened it, redistributed power to the people closest to the work. He cut deadweight contracts with overpriced consultants and reinvested in team training. He moved the company's resources away from self-congratulation and toward self-correction. It was radical, not in vision, but in execution, because no one had believed it would be enforced by someone they wouldn't have let through the front door a month earlier. Back at the lobby, the security guard started greeting him by name. Not because he had been scolded, but because he had started to see. See the shift. See the man behind the posture. And others followed. By the third week, staff who once looked away now nodded. The ones who once gossiped now watched. And slowly, the tension began to dissolve not into comfort but into clarity. He hosted his first town hall in the cafeteria. No stage. No podium. Just folding chairs and raw numbers on a whiteboard. He let the employees ask anything. And they did. Boldly. He answered each one, not with evasion but with evidence. No branding. Just blunt honesty. And by the end of it, they saw the shift not in promises but in proximity. The boss wasn't above them. He was among them. That night, when the building emptied out and silence settled like dust, he remained. Alone in the same conference room they once locked him out of. Reviewing numbers. Annotating systems. Planning the next restructuring layer. And in the corner of the table sat a plastic visitor badge. Still unused. Still unnecessary. Because the man who needed one once now ran every floor it granted access to. Change is never quiet for long. Once the dust of his first reform settled, the resistance began to organize, not on the factory floor, not among the interns or the night crews, but in glass-walled offices on the highest levels. Among those who had built their status not on merit but on memory. They whispered in lounges, scheduled off-site lunches, and shared glances during leadership briefings. He was dismantling too much too fast, they said. He didn't understand the way we do things. He was too young, too different, too unbothered by tradition. And worst of all, he listened too much to the people they had spent decades ignoring. One VP tried to go around him, leaked a memo, manipulated a board contact, arranged a meeting in hopes of forcing the new guy into a corner. But he came prepared, not with threats, with spreadsheets, with receipts, with a timeline of missed deliverables, inflated budgets, and ignored employee feedback loops that painted a portrait no PR spin could fix. By the end of the meeting, the VP resigned quietly. Not fired, just exposed. And everyone watching understood. This boss didn't swing recklessly. He aimed. And he hit only when necessary. He didn't celebrate the shakeup. He tightened his focus. Revised policy documents by hand. Instituted a 2-level reporting loop that let junior staff submit blind evaluations of department heads. He restructured bonus systems no longer tied to seniority, but to measurable impact. For some, it felt like liberation. For others, like an earthquake. The floor beneath them was no longer familiar. Because merit, not memory, was the new badge. One morning, he stood in front of the same security guard. This time not alone. He was walking with the youngest coder on staff. A girl fresh out of community college who had found a critical flaw in the company's outdated database structure. She didn't have the right badge level to enter the executive wing. Security hesitated. The girl looked down. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "She's with me." And that was it. She entered. Not because her badge said so, because her work did. Later that day, a small group of employees gathered in the break room, sharing stories about the changes, about the way the company felt different. They spoke of him not as a mystery but as momentum. The man they once overlooked now walked every corridor as if he'd always been there. And in a way he had, not in title, but in effort, in hours, in hunger. That night he walked the building alone again. He paused in front of a framed wall of executive portraits. He didn't see himself there, and he didn't want to, because his face didn't need to be on the wall. It was already in the culture. 6 months passed. The company moved differently now. Emails were shorter. Meetings were fewer. Feedback was faster. Departments once divided by glass walls and silent protocols now shared ideas like oxygen. The cafeteria tables had changed too, no longer separated by job title or whispered politics, but scattered with strange new alliances. Engineers eating with cleaners, designers sketching beside logistics leads, interns pitching projects in real time. He had not just changed the structure. He had changed the center of gravity. One morning, during a quarterly review, the board assembled in person for the first time in nearly a year. They came prepared, some with praise, others with doubt masked as concern. They asked questions like weapons, measured, formal, laced with implications. Why so many structural changes? Why so few promotions among senior leadership? Why so much emphasis on inclusion when the numbers already looked good? He answered each question plainly, not with ambition, with alignment. Every change was mapped to output, every decision traced to performance, every uncomfortable choice linked to progress. When he finished, the room was silent, not because he had silenced them, because they had nothing left to challenge. Data doesn't need applause. It just needs to be undeniable. In the elevator afterward, one board member finally broke the silence. "We didn't expect this from you." He turned and met her eyes. "You didn't expect me at all." The doors opened. He stepped out. That week, a new round of hires joined the company. All of them from overlooked pools. Returnees to the workforce, refugees with engineering backgrounds, community college grads with unmatched coding skill. When they entered the building, they did so with hesitation. Badges clipped awkwardly, unsure of where they fit. But as they passed the front desk, the security guard stood tall and greeted them with a single phrase, "You're in the right place." He saw this from the second floor overlook. Didn't say a word, just nodded once. Because the front door wasn't a test anymore. It was a beginning. He kept walking, past the glass-walled offices he had refused to occupy, past the executive lounge he had turned into a free workspace, to a room at the end of the hall, small, unremarkable. Inside were whiteboards, folded chairs, and 3 young employees sketching ideas for a new platform initiative. He pulled up a chair, listened, asked questions, took notes, because he wasn't the kind of boss who needed walls to feel important. He just needed to be in the room where change was happening. Time moved forward, but his approach never changed. He stayed grounded in the systems others had overlooked. He continued walking the halls with the same quiet pace, same alert eyes, same sense of presence that made people stand straighter when they saw him, yet not out of fear, but out of recognition. He had redefined what leadership looked like. Not through speeches, but through proximity. Not through policies, but through practice. He wasn't followed because of his position. He was followed because of his consistency. When the next fiscal year closed, the reports were more than favorable, they were record-breaking. Growth without burnout. Efficiency without cuts. Innovation from teams that had never been invited to contribute before. He didn't take the credit. He redirected the spotlight. Passed bonuses down the chain, launched an equity-sharing plan that included custodians, night staff, and every hand that touched a deliverable. No more invisible labor. No more untouchable offices. The badge didn't define your worth here anymore. Your work did. One afternoon, a new security hire stopped him, didn't recognize him, paused him at the front entrance, asked for a badge. He smiled gently, reached into his backpack, and for the first time produced one. Simple, plain, no title, just his name. The security guard scanned it and waved him through. "Welcome back," he said. He nodded. Good to be here. But they both knew he didn't need that badge. Not anymore. Now it was just for the archives. Later that evening, he stood on the rooftop alone. No event. No toast. Just the city blinking below him. He thought of the first day. The denied entry. The smirk. The eyes that dismissed him. And how none of it had stopped what was always coming. Because the building that once said no had become the engine for his yes. Yes to a new culture. Yes to a new model. Yes to every person who had ever been turned away at a gate for not looking like they belonged, when they were the ones meant to build it better. He walked back downstairs. The lights still on. The halls still full. And in a meeting room on the third floor, 3 interns stayed late, arguing joyfully over a prototype. He knocked once. They turned, startled. He smiled and asked, "Mind if I listen?" They made room. He sat down. No one adjusted their posture. No one stopped. They just kept working. And so did he.